Remarkable. I've got a question from one of our audience members. Reverend Janet Garner Mullins asks, what happened to the community since the litigations, and have the plaintiffs been awarded financially for all their pain and suffering? Let me start with you, Corban, on that, and then go to Mona.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to the communities. What's kind of a remarkable fallout of the 5 federal trials in which the juries found that those farms were a nuisance. As Mona pointed out, the plaintiffs, the neighbors never asked for those farms to be shut down, for the pigs to be taken away. But Smithfield decided all on its own to depopulate those farms. So in Lendora's case, for instance, there were some photos that show this. She and her family lived right. I mean, I should say that a hog farm was built right on top of their house. I mean, it just was, it's the fence, the property line. There's no barrier whatsoever. Stones throw away, these barns, this cesspool. What's remarkable is that after the jury found in favor of her family, Smithfield took all the hogs away. So with them went their waste. And in fact, then it turns out, and I've only heard this as a story since then, and I've not confirmed it, but my understanding is that the hog farmer next door has basically torn down the barns and gotten rid of everything. So it's now just a freestanding field. I guess he may have done that for the tax benefit because he was being taxed on a useless hog operation. But regardless, for Lendora and her family, I mean, the property has been returned in some sense to its pre-hog farm state, back to the way it was when she was a kid in the 1970s. That's a pretty lovely outcome, though. Again, that wasn't what they were asking for. They were just asking for the industry to pay the money, some portion of their profits, to actually modernize and civilize their waste distribution. Industry is not willing to do that, but they were willing to take away, the hogs. So, I heard from a number of other neighbors in other communities where the trials went forward. They too have enjoyed having the hogs gone. But I'll leave Mona to Mona. You can talk about the changes that were made and came out in the trials that Smithfield really did under pressure to make the conditions a little better.
Well, by the time we won the first 2 verdicts, and very significant verdicts, actually, I think the first 3 all were. But at the 3rd trial, all of a sudden, the industry started talking about change. The witnesses on the stand started talking about changes that they had intended to make after the verdicts, and after a settlement, which is confidential, was announced. The press reported on changes being made, changes such as not spraying the waste as high in the air, but still using, in most cases, the spray guns or similar equipment. The trucks, because we had made such a big deal about the trucks running 24 hours a day, a lot of our clients reported they weren't running, and the press reported as often, I believe, or as 24 hours a day. And it was reported that they are moving to the like a refrigerated unit instead of having just dead boxes in the middle of the community. As a result of our trials, we had taken photos of dead boxes. They were moved back, but the basic problem is the lagoon and spray system. It continues. Only the cases that were taken to trial, only those people, they were shut down and the hogs taken out, and we never asked for that. But for the most part, it's not been enough change, and it will never be satisfactory until they get rid of digging an open hole in the earth, lined or unlined, allowing millions and millions of gallons of waste to just simply stay there, evaporate in the air, spray it. And of course, that is the cheapest, most outdated way to manage waste. You have human waste managed where it's treated. In one of our cases, we had human waste treated perfectly because there's so many rules and regulations on that. But for the most part, there are virtually no regulations in our state sadly allows the spray and lagoon system to continue.
I remember from your conversation before that the company that partners with Smithfield from China has better practices in their own country than they allow for here in the U.S.? Do I remember that correctly?
Corban has studied that. Corban, I'm turning that one over to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, in China, they actually don't allow the lagoon and spray field system. So there was a story in Rolling Stone, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, in which the title was, is China using North Carolina like the developing world? Which is the sort of reversal of fortunes that you can't imagine until you see it. I mean, in reality, they are. It's cheaper for them to raise the hogs in North Carolina than it is to raise the hogs in China, and then to ship the meat back. In fact, there was a story not long ago, of this incredible new way of raising and then slaughtering hogs. That it's this giant. I think it was like a 12-story building, like the skyscraper of pork. Which was outfitted with all this technology to keep the hogs healthy and clean, and to raise them as quickly as possible, and obviously to dispose of the waste in a way that doesn't just go out into the rivers and streams or be sprayed out into the air. I mean, if China can do it, I mean, for crying out loud, we can do it. And in fact, as Mona and her team were able to show at trial, it would cost, a few $100 million, to this multi-billion-dollar company to actually replace these legacy lagoon and spray field systems with a more civilized way of managing their waste. And they just won't do it. What they will do is they realized not that long ago that they could cap the lagoons and capture the methane and turn it into power. And with the help of Duke Energy, make more millions. So, where the company can make money, the company is willing to spend money, where unfortunately it's just hurting the environment and the people next door, they'd rather litigate. And one thing that was interesting about it, and Mona lived through this, but, I would love it if there were many more of these cases that could come down the pike. But sadly, the industry went to the State House and got the law changed in midstream, and they've basically barred the courthouse door. Not quite, but it would take a really unique case to be able to get past the gauntlet that they set up for these cases in the future. They basically insulated agricultural operations from nuisance lawsuits. A 400-year-old tort says that, hey, you can't unreasonably interfere with your neighbor's use and enjoyment of their property. Apparently now in North Carolina, for agricultural operations, that's no longer good law.
Well, I'm sorry to do this to you. Thank you for that brilliant answer. But you guys are so popular. I'm getting questions left and right. And I want to get to some of these questions if I can. Let me try to, if I can go through them quickly. One of them, I think you've touched on a little bit, but Rania Masri, a name I don't think I've heard since I was in graduate school at Duke, says, thank you for your time and energy. Ms. Wallace, given the so-called anti-nuisance legislation in North Carolina and in other numerous agricultural states, do you think there's any room for litigation against the ongoing environmental injustices of hog and poultry farms within North Carolina?
It is, to me, beyond tragic that literally right before we were to go to trial, that our legislators passed a bill. They came within 2 votes of dismissing our lawsuits together. It was one of the biggest, I don't know what to say, showdowns in North Carolina legislative history. You couldn't even get into the legislative building. But the bill was to, one, get rid of our current lawsuits, the ones that we had filed years before and been litigating for years, and then to essentially get rid of the common law nuisance, which was the first tort in the 16th century in history. And they did pass that bill that said, essentially in common sense, it does away. It allows you to file a lawsuit, but you have to file it within a year. It limits you to rental income, and for just a very short time, that is valueless, essentially. So as to private nuisance, that is a problem. The environmentalists have continued, environmental groups, and we support them, and they were extremely supportive of us. River keepers, water keepers, Southern Environmental Law Center. There's still litigation ongoing, which they're trying to get the industry to make these changes. But for those listening, it was so disappointing with the legislators. It wasn't just that they changed the law. They passed a an anti-gag bill, one of the most restrictive, that wouldn't allow any of the workers to share information with us. They passed other legislation making all the farm records private and no longer public, except for certain circumstances. So it was one bit of legislation after another, interfering with the access to the courts and the right to seek justice that was so discouraging throughout. And I just thank the jurors that they did get their verdicts correct. They saw it, and that's why I wanted to show it to you. I don't think it's justified at all what they're continuing to do.
Thank you. Mayor Jennifer Roberts asks, Smithfield was supposed to use the latest technology for environmental protection in a settlement years ago, but they've not complied. Why have they not been held accountable? Josh Stein's office was engaging in this. Corban, anything on that?
I'm guessing that she's referring to the Smithfield agreement with the state attorney general in 2000. I mean, look, what happens in politics when you have an intractable social problem and you've got a bunch of people clamoring for change, and then on the other side, you've got a super profitable company with a lot of money going to politicians? Well, you study the problem. So instead of, actually having the AG go after Smithfield and say, no, you're despoiling the environment, you're harming our constituents, the AG set up a deal where Smithfield would fund a search for new technology to replace lagoons and spray fields. With $15 million, it became $25 million. And the idea was, look, the good scientists at NC State would study the issue, would come up with some technology. And if it turned out that the technology was both feasible for the farmers to implement and also would fundamentally take care of the problem of environmental, despoliation, and would also be economically, wouldn't put the company out of business, economically feasible. Smithfield would actually be obligated under the agreement to implement the technology across the entire supply chain. Well, what did Smithfield do? So the good scientists at NC State found a technology that they called super soils, later Terra Blue, that did exactly what everyone expected that it would do. It was just a more civilized way of disposing of hog waste: separate the liquids and solids, recycle both, don't send any of it into the air or the rivers and streams. But with this technology, of course, it was going to cost some more than the legacy lagoons and spray fields, which are medieval technology. And so when it came time for the environmental subcommittee to sit down and decide, is this economically feasible? The industry had already packed that subcommittee with its own people. And so what they decided was, if it would cost Smithfield 1 cent more to implement this new technology, it's not economically feasible. So they were able to basically buy 12 years apiece, for a measly $25 million. And then they got sued. Thank God for Mona. I mean, really, had it not been for Wallace and Graham and Mike Keskey and these plaintiffs who are courageous enough to stand up and take their place in front of their communities, against intimidation and against all odds, the Smithfield agreement never would have had a prayer of being enforced, even to the extent that it has been. What's ironic, though, is that that agreement is still live. I mean, the current attorney general could turn around and, knock on Smithfield's door and say, hey, guys, guess what? I'm coming after you. You signed on the dotted line and you basically torpedoed the process in an unjust way. So maybe there'll be an attorney general who will stand up to them again and say, let's revisit the Smithfield agreement.
So I guess we need to talk to Mr. Stein about that. I want to jump down to this question here because I think it's a familiar name. Matt Leatherman says, these stories of water continue to unfold for these communities and Duplin, Pender, nearby counties, including disposal of chicken waste, chemical runoff from manufacturing facilities, decay of water sewer systems, and flooding from increasing extreme weather. What gives you hope for these communities' future, and what gives you concern? And what do you think folks in this session can do to be the best agents for change? If you can answer that that's not a softball question.
I don't mind taking that, and then Corban come behind me. Voting. Who you vote for, your legislators, you need to ask them what's their opinion on this issue. And if they don't want to do something about the environment and to preserve it and equality and access to the courts and justice for all, then that's not a person we want to vote for. Secondly, groups like your group, the environmental groups. I saw a question where someone asked about the Humane Society of PETA. They've been
Holly
very
Adams.
active, very concerned about the animals.
Mhm.
This book, Corban, it was only after the 4th federal trial. I never spoke to the press. I would never be interviewed. We only told our story in the courthouse, but it became obvious after the 4th trial that unless the story was told, that there would never be change. And also, you need to make good choices in what food you choose to eat, and you need to know how it's raised, where it's raised, and who is trying to do the right thing by the environment. You ask about Eastern North Carolina and the chickens and the turkeys and the contaminated water and C8, and our firm is handling the Camp Lejeune cases, by the way. North Carolina has gotten, instead of better, it's worse, because now we are, I think, #1 in this country about chicken farms. And we have so many turkeys, and already you have the C8, you have Camp Lejeune. So there needs to be serious change looking at North Carolina. And really, the people just need to unite and to get that done. And this law, this lack of regulations in North Carolina, and this get out of jail free card for agriculture, that's why we're having more and more chicken and turkey farms. So, you know, I'm very disappointed in the legislators who supported them.
Yeah,
I would add only one thing. That's a brilliant answer and just right on all the points. Cory Booker, the senator, the U.S. senator, has a bill, the Farm System Reform Act, that would go a long way to reforming this industry at the federal level. It's, of course, stuck in Congress. But one thing that is, potentially going forward is that every few years, Congress has to pass a new farm bill. And both parties, regardless of, what you think of the parties, both parties always sign on the dotted line when it comes to supporting America's farmers. The question is what goes into the new farm bill this year. And my understanding is that Senator Booker is pushing to add some pieces of his Farm Systems Reform Act to the new farm bill. So that is something that, those with a legislative mind and an interest in supporting a great measure can take a look at and see what you can do. I love Senator Booker. I mean, he actually was down in Eastern North Carolina himself, met Elsie Herring. She told me a story of meeting him, and he's really just a truly great individual. And I hope he's successful with this bill.
Amen. I hope so too. I want to ask this one last question. There's so many more questions. If you could stay around for another hour, I would keep you here because we still have questions. But this question comes from June Bolotnick. She asks about our former Department of Environmental Quality Secretary, Mike Regan, is now the EPA supervisor. He's been very much concerned over the years about the impact of environmental injustices on Black and Brown communities. Do you think that there's any chance that his position there might cause some sort of change in the bills on a federal level if we can't get change on the state level?
Corban, that I certainly would hope that he would step in. He was the whole environmental management group, the state, Diener, all of them were watching these trials. And in fact, one of the individuals who was responsible for the CAFOs and the conditions testified for the industry. I found that most of those that were part of the state, Diener, whatever, had been previously very close to industry. He now has that independence and that national prominence. And also, you didn't mention this, but Dr. Ron Barber, he was very supportive along with Cory Booker. I actually met with him, and he cares very strongly about this issue. So it is racial injustice, it's environmental injustice, it's inequality. I think it hits so many issues that today in this world we're talking about. I'm hopeful someone will stand up and take a stand nationally.
Did you mean William Barber?
William Barber, yes. I'm so sorry. Yes, William Barber.
No.
I'm sorry. Yes.
And he's from that part of the state, lives in that part of the state even now. So yes, he's very much concerned about this issue.